Welcome to our webinar, How to Maximise the Value of Your Pharmacy Ready for Sale. My name is Anne Hutchings and I'm the Managing Director of Hutchings Consultants Limited. You know, when I speak to pharmacists who are thinking of selling, I usually ask what aspect of the sale is most important to them. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the answer is usually price. They want the highest price they can get. Occasionally I get a different answer, such as, oh, I'd like to sell to a first-time buyer, or perhaps, you know, my pharmacy is more suited to a multiple purchaser. But generally speaking, it's, and just get me the best price. So how do you ensure that you get top price? What factors affect the value of a pharmacy? What can you do to improve the value of your pharmacy business? And today we're going to look at all these questions. So how do you think pharmacy value is actually stacking up at the moment? Well, any of you thinking of selling will be pleased to hear that we've seen goodwill valuation increase on average between 10 to 20% since the beginning of this year. So what's made values go up? Well, first of all, we've got lots of buyers out there. We've got multiples such as Boots who are actively back in the market buying again. We have a vast number of first-time buyers registered with us. There are also quite a few small, medium and large groups looking for pharmacies to buy. And the banks have funds and they're lending. They're actually very positive about pharmacy business and they're very keen to lend. We've been getting multiple offers for any good quality pharmacy. And in fact, the demand is such that we're getting multiple offers, sometimes well in excess of the guide price. And of course, applications for new 100-hour contracts in England have been scrapped, and this has led to more stability and renewed confidence in the market. We also have a severe shortage of pharmacies for sale, leading to premium prices being paid in some instances for desirable, good quality, profitable pharmacies in desirable locations. And finally, I think there is a feel-good factor out there with the economy improving, and we haven't experienced this for several years. So overall, all these factors, I believe, are contributing to pharmacy prices increasing. Let me just give you an example of a pharmacy we sold recently in South London. Now, this particular pharmacy, we actually got 10 offers and achieved 62% over the guide price. So, could say, is now a good time to sell? Looking at the market generally, sentiment's very positive at the moment, and as I previously mentioned, pharmacy values are up, and it's a strong seller's market. None of us have a crystal ball, so I can't predict what might happen in the future. I would say that if you're coming up to retirement or simply want out, now is probably as good a time as any. I sometimes come across pharmacy owners who want to hang on for a bit more. The problem is we just don't know what's around the corner, and it can be a tough decision. One thing that is very important to mention is that most of you should qualify for entrepreneur's relief. And without getting too technical about tax, this means that when you sell your business, you should only have to pay tax of 10% on the gain. And this is an incredibly low rate of tax, and one has to question whether this low rate of tax is actually going to remain in future years. Who knows? I always say to pharmacy owners, take everything into account, and remember it's what's actually left in your pocket after the sale that counts. And if we just look at a simple example, you know, let's say you made £1 million gain on the sale of your pharmacy. 10% tax means you'd pay £100,000 in tax, whereas if that tax rate doubled to 20%, that would mean £200,000 in tax. So it's certainly worth considering and thinking about. And if you are thinking of selling in the current market, I would say be 100% committed. It's not actually a good idea to put your business on the market and then withdraw it to perhaps try again next year. And there are actually two very good reasons for this. Firstly, pharmacy is a small niche market where everybody knows everyone, and believe me, people remember. And typically comments I get from buyers are, oh, that pharmacy was on the market a couple of years ago and they couldn't sell it then, so what's wrong with it? So you'll limit your market the second time round. And secondly, whilst you're focused on trying to sell the business, you're likely to take your eye off the ball in terms of running that pharmacy. And this obviously can result in a drop of turnover and profits, and ultimately is going to affect the sale price. Now, this brings me on to pharmacy valuations. I know that pharmacists like to think of pence in the pound. And I often get pharmacists calling me, and the first thing they say is, what will I get to the pound these days? In years gone by, pence in the pound guide was commonly used, and it was a rough guide, although even then it had some flaws. These days things have changed, and you can't just look at pence in the pound figures. Far more emphasis is being put on pharmacy profits. But there are also other factors out there which affect pharmacy's value, and I'm going to be having a look at these in a few minutes. But first of all, let's actually look at why pence in the pound doesn't work. Here we've got an example of two pharmacies, Pharmacy A and Pharmacy B. Both of them have a sales turnover figure of £1 million each, Both of them have gross profits of £300,000 each, but their trading expenses are a bit different. Pharmacy A has trading expenses of £150,000, whereas Pharmacy B has trading expenses of £250,000. Now this leaves Pharmacy A with a net profit of £150,000, but Pharmacy B only has profits of £50,000. So tell me, do you really think that Pharmacy B with a net profit of only 50k is worth as much as Pharmacy A with net profits of 150k? If you are selling a pharmacy, that business is going to be valued by both the buyer and their funders based on the profitability of the business. However, some pharmacies, which we're going to refer to as desirable pharmacies in certain UK locations, are also going to command a premium price. And again, we're going to look at that in a bit more detail later on. But the first thing I do when someone asks me what their pharmacy is worth is to actually ask for their latest accounts and up-to-date trading figures, because I know this is how the banks will value the business and it's the basis on which a buyer is going to make their offer. But I also ask the pharmacy owner some key questions to get an overall feel for the business so that I can establish in my mind how desirable that business is going to be on the market. So when we're carrying out a valuation, the starting point is to look at the accounts. So this is how the banks and buyers are going to value the business. So let's have a look at a typical set of accounts for a pharmacy owner in Leicester. Here we've got Mr. Patel. He's given us his latest accounts up to the 31st of March 2013, and his sales income from the NHS is £800,000. His counter trade is £80,000. This gives him total sales of £880,000. Now his cost of sales is £624,800, leaving a gross profit of £255,200, against which he's got trading expenses of £129,000. Now this leaves us with an EBITDA of £126,200. Now for those of you who don't know what EBITDA stands for, it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. And one little tip for you here, when working out the EBITDA, you must include a salary for yourself at the full market rate if you're the pharmacist, for example, working in the pharmacy. Because I know sometimes, typically, I can see company accounts where the pharmacy owner will put in just 5 or 10,000 in salary for himself or herself, with the balance being taken as dividends for tax reasons, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for this purpose of calculating the bottom line profit figures for valuation purposes, if you're working in the pharmacy, you must include a full market rate salary for yourself. So how are the banks actually going to value the business based on this? Well, we've got our EBITDA of £126,200. Now the banks would typically take a multiple of this of between 5 and 7 times. So for example, if it was 5 times the £126,200, the value would be £631,000. Or if it was 7 times £126,200, the value would be £883,400. So at this point we expect the pharmacy to be worth somewhere between £631 and £883k. Obviously the pharmacy owner is going to be hoping for the highest figure he or she can possibly get. Now let's have a look at what else determines the value. First of all, location, and there are actually 2 aspects to this. For example, pharmacies in health centres or situated next door to doctors would generally be expected to fetch a higher price than other pharmacies. And pharmacies in some parts of the UK are more sought after than others. For example, places that are regarded as a bit out of the way, such as perhaps coastal areas in Cornwall, in our experience struggle to sell. There simply isn't the demand for them. That's not to say you can't sell them, but you're not likely to get multiple offers. On the other hand, some very hot locations, such as London at the moment, where we can't get enough pharmacies to sell, are attracting multiple offers. So these pharmacies in London are particularly desirable at the moment. Now, threats to pharmacy viability. In England, in places where we've seen a lot of 100-hour applications being made, this has had an effect on the desirability of that location. And perhaps more specifically, if 100-hour applications opened up near enough to your pharmacy to affect the business, this can have a significant impact on the value of the pharmacy, and it might even make it difficult to sell. Similarly, doctor movement in an area can affect both the value of a pharmacy in that area, and it's also going to limit the interest of potential buyers. Next, I want to have a quick look at staff costs. One of the biggest factors affecting valuations, which I'm seeing at the moment, is pharmacy businesses where their staff costs are higher than the market norm for similar pharmacies. Staff wages impact on the net profits of a business, and if a pharmacy is overstaffed, expect that to reduce the value of that business. When I tell pharmacists this, 9 times out of 10 they're aware that they're overstaffed, but they don't actually want to do anything about it. After all, they're about to sell the business and they don't want to rock the boat. Typically the response is, oh, the new owner can sort that out. Well, that might be the case, but the overstaffing situation will do 2 things. First of all, it's going to reduce the value of the business, so you may actually receive considerably less than you were expecting. And secondly, it's also going to limit the interest from your potential buyers. A new owner doesn't want to have to start off making people redundant. It's costly, time-consuming, and no doubt will affect the relationship with ongoing staff members. I'd suggest to anybody who's thinking of selling that actually have a good look at your staff costs, because I was working with a health centre pharmacy recently where I reviewed their business and actually advised them on various issues which had an effect on the value, and one of these issues was staff costs. We actually set a target date of 12 months to get everything in order, including the reduction of staff, and I estimate that this has actually put about an extra £200,000 on the value of that pharmacy. Now, property issues, particularly leases, high rents, unreasonable terms in the lease, or leases which aren't renewable. These are all issues which we come across, which will all affect the value of the pharmacy. Buyers actually need security of tenure, so they're going to be looking for a lease with at least 10 years left and renewable at the end of the term. Sometimes these days banks are looking for longer than 10 years. I mean, we've had, for example, requests for 15 years. If you have a lease, make sure it's in order before the pharmacy goes on the market. For example, if you have a lease which is not renewable, you may find that you can't find a buyer for your business, particularly where the lease has less than 10 years left. So what can you do? Well, it may be worth going to the landlord, seeing if you can renegotiate your existing lease, or perhaps trying to negotiate a new lease. And if that's not possible, are there any premises which are vacant nearby where perhaps you could relocate? It's certainly worth looking at and just perhaps doing the number crunching. Size of the premises. Are your premises actually big enough for the business? And what I mean by this is sometimes we see pharmacies with good sized turnovers operating from very small premises, and this can actually limit the future potential of the business in that there isn't the space to take on more staff and increase the turnover. Sometimes there's not even space for a proper consultation room, and this is going to affect the value of the pharmacy, as a new owner will want a business with potential. And if this applies to you, what can you do about it? Well, obviously that depends. If there is room to expand, this may be worth looking into, or if there are other premises near the pharmacy that could be suitable, again, it may be relocating. It just depends. But certainly if you've got small premises, it might be worth looking at what the options are and actually, again, doing some number crunching. Nature of the business. Here we're looking at things like, for example, is it labour intensive? Are you dealing with care homes, high counter trade? If you are dealing with homes, this can affect the value of the business, and as a general guide I'd say that if more than 10% of your items are from homes, then we need to take this into account in the valuation. And there's a saying with homes which is easy come, easy go. When I speak to pharmacy owners who recently bought pharmacies dealing with homes and I say, how's it going, I often get the response, oh, we lost the homes not long after we took over the business. And of course homes are labour intensive. And I'd say that, those of you who are dealing with homes, have a look at what you're earning from them. Calculate the costs of dealing with them and see what, if any, profit you're actually making. MDS, monitored dosage systems. These can often be very labour intensive, so again we look at whether as a percentage of turnover a pharmacy is doing more than about 10 or 12%. And we still occasionally encounter pharmacies with high counter trade, particularly in city centres. These days most pharmacies' counter trade is less than 10%. So if there is something out of the norm, say 40 or 50% counter trade, then that needs to be taken into account. What we have seen in the last 10 years is diminishing counter trade for lots of reasons, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. So when we see a pharmacy with high counter trade, that's going to be reflected in the valuation. Buyers aren't so keen on paying so much for counter trade that may not be sustainable. Also, I'd mention that the banks tend to look closely and tighten their lending criteria for pharmacies with more than about 25% counter trade. So this also will have an effect on offers from buyers. Potential for growth. If you're buying a business, you want one that has potential to be developed and it can grow. Consequently, pharmacies with potential are more popular with buyers and more likely to get a premium on their value because this type of pharmacy is going to attract more competitive offers. So if you're going to sell your pharmacy, it's a good idea to take a long, hard look at it from the perspective that if you were starting again, what could you do to enhance and grow the business? Make a list of all the things you can think of to present to your buyers. Now, I want to just have a quick look at wholesale and internet business. Now, we come across many pharmacies that have some wholesale and/or internet business in their turnover these days. The problem is that often it's very difficult to separate the wholesale and internet parts of the business from the traditional pharmacy income, and this can cause problems. For example, our experience of selling pharmacy has shown that buyers don't want to pay for wholesale, so this needs to be taken out of the equation. And if a buyer can't easily see exactly what the makeup of the business is, they won't bother with it and they'll just move on to the next pharmacy. I can't stress enough how important it is to ask your accountant to prepare a simple profit and loss account for the wholesale and internet parts of the business, if applicable. For example, internet pharmacy sales can have very high levels of expenses, so if you're including this with your main pharmacy business, whilst this is fine for HMRC, it's not presenting the business in the most attractive way for buyers. I sometimes come across pharmacy owners who are a bit reluctant to pay their accountant to do this extra work. But believe me, it's well worth it because the difference in the offers and the interest in the pharmacy will by far exceed the small cost to the accountant. And this brings me on to the question of financial information. And these days you can't sell your business without up-to-date financial information such as your accounts. Gone are the days when you can produce accounts which are a couple of years out of date. Both buyers and their funders expect to see the latest accounts, and if you're selling a group, they'll also be looking for management accounts for the current year. And actually, if it is a group sale, individual profit and loss accounts for each branch should be available. If financial information isn't available, you may struggle to sell the business, or just perhaps attract one or two poor offers. In other words, you're leaving money on the table. So the same thing applies here that I just mentioned before. Pay your accountant to provide this information. Next, we'll have a look at trading hours. Now, as a rough guide, I use 55 hours. So if a pharmacy is open for more than about 55 hours a week, this becomes a little bit negative. Obviously, it's going to reflect on the bottom line profits, higher the staff costs, and bottom line profits being less, pharmacy value less. Having said that, an exception to this rule is London, where longer hours are actually expected. So at this point, I'd like to just have a quick look at 100-hour contracts for any of you who are listening tonight who actually run 100-hour pharmacies. And the questions are they viable? Can you sell them? What are they worth? Well, there's a lot of debate on the point at which 100-hour pharmacies are viable. And by that I mean turning a profit. I tend to use as a general guide a turnover of around £1 million plus, although I have seen slightly smaller ones which are profitable. In fact, we've actually sold ones with less turnover than £1 million, but I'd absolutely stress that they were very profitable. So the answer is, providing 100-hour contracts profitable, then you should be able to sell it. But having said that, there's not the same kind of market for them as there is for standard hour contracts. But having said that, if there was one in a health centre turning over a couple of million a year, that should be much easier to sell. So what are they worth? Well, obviously less than standard hour contracts. And again, the points we've already looked at regarding pharmacy valuations in general are going to apply. But as a rough guide, we find that 100-hour pharmacies tend to achieve market values of around 50 to 80% of standard hour contracts. So in other words, let's assume we had a standard hour contract that was worth £1 million. A similar pharmacy, but trading for 100 hours, would probably get between £500,000 and £800,000. So, as we've seen, there are many things that actually affect the value of a pharmacy. So let's actually go back to our example with Mr. Patel in Leicester. We had his EBITDA figure, which was £126,200. We said the bank would typically take a multiple of between 5 and 7 times this figure. So we were looking at between £631,000 and £883,400. So we need to look at what other factors are going to help in the valuation of his pharmacy. Now, first of all, his location. Mr. Patel is based in Leicester, and the pharmacy is situated in a good secondary location with other shops. It's got good parking. He's no direct competition. In fact, his nearest pharmacy is just over a mile away. And Leicester is actually a very popular location for pharmacy buyers. So all of this is very positive. In terms of threats, Mr. Patel's assured us that he's not aware of anything happening in the area which could affect his business. His local doctors, from which he gets most of his scripts, are about 300 metres away, and there's no likelihood of them moving. So again, that's positive. His staff costs are fine. In fact, his staff costs are about £45,000. That, of course, excludes the pharmacist, and £45,000 for a business of his turnover is perfectly reasonable. Now, he's got 12 years left out of a 15-year lease, and it is under the Landlord and Tenant Act, so it should be renewable at the end of the term. His renting rate's £20,000 per annum, which is quite reasonable again for his location and size of premises. His actual premises are a good size. He's got a double-fronted shop with large shop floor. He's got a good dispensing area. He's got a separate consultation room and also a stock room at the rear of the premises. So plenty of room there for anybody coming in and hoping to expand the business. He's got a typical pharmacy, which is about 90% NHS and 10% counter trade. He assures me he doesn't deal with any homes, and his MDS is negligible, just applies to a couple of patients. So again, tick in the box there. Potential for growth. He does hardly any services. He says he's coming up to retirement and he just hasn't been able to deal with this. So there's potential to develop services. He said there's also happens to be a number of care homes in the area, so a new owner could possibly target these. In addition, he only does one collection a day from his local doctors, so there's scope to increase the collections and from other local surgeries, and also to develop a delivery service. So, there's quite a bit of potential there for someone new coming into the business. In terms of wholesale and internet, he doesn't do either of these, so there's no issue there. His financial information, his accounts, all information is bang up to date and available for any potential buyers. So in terms of his trading hours, he's open for 47.5 hours a week, which is fairly average, so again, there's no issue there. So overall, I'd say everything's very positive for Mr. Patel. And based on our knowledge of the market, in this particular example, we would recommend marketing the business for offers over £880,000. And this is actually pitched at a level which we believe could create a competitive interest, and we'd hope to achieve several good offers from which we can negotiate the best price. I'm going to come back to Mr. Patel a little bit later, but first of all I want to have a quick look at premium prices. Here's an example of a pharmacy we sold very recently in East London. It was actually a health centre pharmacy, and we got multiple offers for this pharmacy and achieved 43% over the guide price. Now, for those of you who still want to translate that into pence in the pound, it actually sold for £1.59 to the pound. So, as you can see from this example, we're achieving some top prices at the moment. Now, to achieve a premium price, you need a desirable pharmacy. And as an example, health centre pharmacies are desirable, or pharmacies next to doctors. Also, some high street pharmacies can fall into this category if they're in the right location. Examples of desirable locations include London, home counties, parts of the West Midlands, parts of South Wales, parts of Scotland, just to name but a few. And if you actually have a desirable pharmacy in a desirable location, that's the ultimate combination. No one can tell you exactly how much your pharmacy will achieve in the open market. It doesn't matter who you speak to, it's just an opinion. What I can tell you is that if you put the pharmacy on the market at a price which is too high, it's going to kill interest in it. For example, I've had people come to me who've had their pharmacies on the market with another agent for a year or 18 months and they haven't been able to sell. And when I've looked at the valuations, these businesses have been marketed at prices which are too high. To get a premium price, it's key to put the business on the market at a guide price that will attract buyers, and then let the buyers decide on the value by obtaining competitive bids and negotiation. This year we've been seeing pharmacies selling far in excess of bank valuations, so unless you put your pharmacy on the open market, you'll never know what its true value is. Now, just going back to Mr. Patel's pharmacy in our example, I would expect it to fetch well in excess of the guide price. And if it was properly marketed, it would probably fetch well over £900,000. But, as I've said, neither I nor anyone else can predict the final outcome. It's down to the buyers, getting multiple offers, and then negotiation. So this actually brings me on to private sales. Is it really an easy option? Well, for many pharmacy owners, selling privately can look like an easy option. Maybe your locum or local groups expressed an interest in your pharmacy, and before you know it, you've agreed to sell to them. What I've been observing recently is the collapse of a lot of private sales. I've seen a huge increase in the number of pharmacy owners who come to me after months and months of trying to sell their pharmacy privately, just for the deal to collapse before completion. And the reasons for this are sometimes the buyer can't get finance and the deal keeps delaying. buyer says, oh, just give me a few more weeks, and so on to the seller. And I've had some people contact me who've been living with this stressful situation for a year or more. And this leads me on to low valuation, because sometimes when the sale's just being delayed and delayed, again the seller will come to me and we'll talk about pharmacy sale and the structure, and I'll actually have a look at the value and see that the value that's been agreed privately is far less than we would expect to get on the open market. Sometimes the buyer tries to renegotiate the price prior to completion, and this is often a tactic in private sales, but very often these days it's leading back to the lack of finance issue. It's so important to know who to sell your pharmacy to, who the buyers are with cash and adequate bank financing. We vet all the buyers thoroughly to ensure that their finances stack up. The other problem with private sales is that sometimes the terms and conditions of sale can be totally skewed towards the buyer, particularly if the buyer has an agent acting for them. For example, I've had pharmacy sellers come into me for advice and find that they've agreed the structure of a sale that's going to cost them hundreds of thousands in tax. In the information pack which we emailed to you, I included a case study of a pharmacy group owner in Yorkshire who tried to sell his group privately before he actually appointed us to handle it. And when you have a minute, it's worth reading this case study, because it demonstrates that for private sales we can negotiate a better price and terms and conditions of sale than you're ever likely to achieve yourself. And our fee, as a matter of interest, was just a fraction of the extra price that we achieved, and of course also the client had the added bonus of us obtaining better terms and conditions of sale, and also actually reducing his stress levels. Now I just want to have a look at some key do's and don'ts when selling. I'd say do be 100% committed to the sale. Be absolutely sure that you're ready to sell and it's the right thing for you. Prepare for the sale. Get your paperwork in order. Make sure your accounts are up to date, and if you have any lease issues, sort them out prior to putting your pharmacy on the market. Do take advice on your tax position before you sell. For example, if you have a company, do you have any assets such as properties which need to be removed from the company before selling? If your accountant doesn't have experience in this area, we can help you as we have tax expertise in-house. Do appoint an experienced pharmacy agent. Buyers will take you more seriously and offer more if they know you have an agent marketing the business. If you want to get top price, you need to have competitive offers. And do appoint an experienced pharmacy solicitor. It'll speed up the sale and mean less stress for you. Also, you can be assured that your interests are going to be fully covered. Now, a couple of don'ts. Don't try and negotiate the sale yourself when you appoint an agent. Allow the agent to take charge of the sale. That's their job, that's their area of expertise, and it's what you're paying them for. An example I can give you of this is sometimes when a seller appoints us to act, they'll suddenly restrict the amount of marketing we can do. They can say, oh, you can only talk to 1 or 2 buyers. And that's fine. We fully respect our clients and we'll always work with them in whichever way they want. But the point I want to make is that if we restrict the market like that, we're not going to achieve multiple offers, and obviously that's also going to restrict the price that they're likely to get. Another don't think that the sale's just going to happen, that you can sit back and let it take its course. So don't procrastinate. Agree timescales at the outset for each part of the sale and be proactive. Also, don't forget to disclose something which could be material to the sale. For example, if something's happening which could affect your business, such as your doctor's moving, it's best to be upfront about it, as your buyer is going to do their due diligence, and when they find out, it's going to lead to distrust and it'll jeopardize the sale. And quite likely the sale will probably fall through at that point. It's best to be upfront with your buyer, and it's quite possible that a deal can be structured in such a way so as to protect your interests fully. You know, I'm always happy to provide a free valuation for anyone who's thinking of selling their pharmacy or pharmacy group for that matter. Or if you'd just like to have a chat about the market, just give me a call. My contact details are both in the pack of information we sent and also on the screen now. Thank you very much for listening to the webinar. I hope it was informative and provided you with some helpful information.